Hi, this is your host Danny, and this is English Plus Podcast. Have you ever thought about different ways to talk about the future? Well, you might know that you can use will, be going to, you can say I will do that, I'm going to do that, etc. But have you ever thought about using be to or be about to talk about the future? Have you heard people use it before and you are still wondering how you can use it yourself? Look no further because that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Talk about be to plus infinitive and be about to plus infinitive as well to talk about the future. Welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast, where you get to learn English, business, culture, literature, and a lot more. Two things to remember: that you will always find extra practice on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, and don't forget to support us on Patreon to help us keep our content free forever. And now, this is your host, Danny, and let's enjoy a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Welcome to a new grammar episode from English Plus Podcast. We're going to talk about be to and be about to plus infinitive to talk about the future. Now, why is that important? Because it is used a lot. That is a very good reason why you should learn this. And another thing is that you don't always have to use will or be going to. It is used a lot. You hear it all the time. Police officers are to visit. This new railway is to be reopened, etc. Now, all of these things are using be to or be about to, and it refers to the future. But it is not as simple as this. But first, as I tell you all the time, you need to know why you are learning this stuff. If you're not convinced that this is important, don't listen to it, and you can stop here, listen to our other episodes. But if you know that this is going to help you write and speak better, so stick with me, and we will talk about everything you need to know about be to or be about to plus infinitive to talk about the future. Now, a very common use. Be to plus infinitive is commonly used in news reports to talk about events that are likely to happen in the near future. Like when we say police officers are to visit every home in the area. Or the main Rome to Naples railway line is to be reopened today. And that is obviously the passive form. Is to be reopened. Not is to reopen, is to be reopened. And that is passive form again. But both of these sentences, we used be to plus infinitive to talk about something that is likely to happen in the near future. And as I told you, that is commonly used in news reports. But that's not everything. It is also used to talk about formal or official arrangements, formal instructions, and to give orders. For example, you can say, "You are not to leave the school without my permission." You are not to leave the school. That's formal instructions, giving orders. Or, the European Parliament is to introduce a new law on safety at work. That is an official arrangement, but you can see that both of these are formal. Or, you can say children are not to be left unsupervised in the museum. That is something we might see on a sign or something. Formal instructions. So you can use be to with infinitive to also talk about official arrangements, formal instructions, or to give orders. But remember, that is not informal at all. That is all formal. Now, as you can see that we used the passive form here, like children are not to be left unsupervised in the museum. Well, you can say that you are not to leave children unsupervised in the museum. But why do we use the passive form here? What does it add? Well, passive forms are often used to make orders and instructions more impersonal. So it is more accepted by people. When you say you are not to leave, that is too direct and people might not like it. But when they see something like children are not to be left unsupervised in the museum, well, they accept that a lot more easily because you make the orders and instructions more impersonal. But that's just a side note. Of course, we need to talk about the passive, and we will very soon. We will talk about the passive. We will talk about these important things you need to know about the passive, when to use it, and of course, how to form it. But that's not for today. Today, we're still talking about be to plus infinitive and be about to plus infinitive to talk about the future. And now we come to a very important point. Yes, we talked about be to plus infinitive. We use it to talk about things that are going to happen in the near future, most probably, likely, etc. Or to talk about some formal things like official arrangements, orders, etc. But a very important thing you need to know about with B2 plus infinitive, that it talks about future events that can be controlled by people. Now, I'll give you some examples, and I'll show you some examples where you don't use B2 plus infinitive because the action cannot be controlled by people. Let me start by something that can be controlled by people. In the next few years, thousands of speed cameras are to appear on major roads. Or we can say will appear. Both are fine. Will is fine. Are to appear on major roads. That's also fine. But here, if you think about it, how are these cameras to appear on these roads? How will they appear on these roads? We will add them on people. People will add them. So that is controllable by people. So we can use B2 plus infinitive if we want. But of course, if you don't know for sure, use will. It is a safe option. But now, notice in this second example, I can't use B2 plus infinitive to talk about this action in the future because it cannot be controlled by people. Now, in this example, scientists say they can't predict when or where the disease will appear again. Now, of course, this sentence is correct, will appear again. But do you think we can say is to appear again? Can we say the disease is to appear again? No, we don't say that because the appearance of the disease cannot be controlled by us. Or let me give you another example. The president is to return to Brazil later today. The president is to return. Of course, this is something that can be controlled by the president himself or the people around the president who arrange his visits, etc. And that is controllable by people. We can use is to return or we can say will return. But can we say this? The comet is to return to our solar system in around 500 years? Well, not really. We should say the comet will return to our solar system in around 500 years, not is to return, because the movement of the comet cannot be controlled by people. Well, can be predicted. That's another thing, but cannot be controlled by people. We cannot really control comets. We just predict when they will come back, etc. However, that being said, when you use B2 plus infinitive to refer to the future from the past, well, I know that's kind of confusing, but it's very simple. You're talking about the future from a past point of view. Now, when I give you the examples, you will understand what I'm talking about. But here, when you talk about B2 plus infinitive to refer to the future from the past, we often use it to describe what happened to someone, whether they were able to influence events or not. So that rule I told you about, controllable by people, only apply when we talk about the future from the present. But when we talk about the future from the past, you can use to be infinitive to talk about both events that are controllable by humans or not. Now, I'll give you the first example. Matthew Flinders sailed past Tasmania in 1770, but it was to be a further 30 years before he landed there. Here, obviously, this was not controllable by him, but I used it was to be anyway. Well, of course, we can say, but it would be a further. It would is obviously okay, but you can use B2 if you want. And this is what we mean when we say use B2 plus infinitive to refer to the future from the past. But it was to be a further 30 years because the whole thing we're talking about is in the past, is in 1770. So obviously we were talking about a future from that point in the past. That's the meaning of future from the past. The other one, Claire Atkins, was to write 2 more books about her experiences in Africa before her death in 1997. Now, obviously, this action is controllable by humans, and we can use B2 plus infinitive if we want. So just to recap what we said about B2 plus infinitive to talk about the future. We use it to talk about things that are likely to happen in the near future, like when we said police officers are to visit every home in the area, or we use it in a formal way to talk about official arrangements, formal instructions, and to give orders. And the important thing we talked about is that we use it to talk about future events that can be controlled by people. But when things cannot be controlled by people, we use will. We don't use B2 infinitive, except when we want to use B2 infinitive to refer to the future from the past, like these 2 last examples I talked about. And now let's move on to talk about another point that has to do with B2 plus infinitive in if clauses. So, B2 plus infinitive in if clauses. We often use B2 plus infinitive in if clauses to say that something must happen first in the main clause before something else can happen in the if clause. Now, of course, that is all theory. That doesn't mean anything. Let's take a look at some examples. If the human race is to survive, we must look at environmental problems now. What I'm saying is, before that happens, before we can survive, before we have the ability to survive, we must look at environmental problems now. Now, something must happen first in the main clause, which is we must look at environmental problems now, before something else can happen in the if clause, which is when we said if the human race is to survive. Before this happens, we must look at environmental problems now. If you want to have this meaning, and I know this is not the easiest thing to say, this is not the easiest structures to use, but sometimes you want those complicated structures, you want those intricate structures. Now, the beauty of this is that you can only use be2 plus infinitive in if clauses and have all this big meaning. You don't have to explain to people what you mean because they already understand. If the human race is to survive, we must look at environmental problems now. We must look at environmental problems. That thing must happen first before the human race can survive. Let me give you another example. The law needs to be revised if justice is to be done. Now, of course, this is another example of a passive form, but the same thing. If justice is to be done, there's something that must happen, and that is in the main clause, which is the law needs to be revised. Now, let's compare the use of be2 plus infinitive and the present simple for the future in if clauses, because that is the usual thing we use in if clauses, especially when we talk about the future, right? Now let's start first with be2. If Lopez is to win gold at the next Olympics, he needs to work on his fitness. Here, we talked about this specific structure. If Lopez is to win gold the next Olympics, if that thing is to happen, there is something that must happen first, and that is in the main clause. He needs to work on his fitness. If he doesn't work on his fitness, he will never win gold at the next Olympics. At least that's what I think. But that's the meaning of the sentence. But if we use the present simple, if we say if Lopez wins gold at the next Olympics, he has said that he will retire from athletics. That's something else. That's conditional. And if this happens, and here the main clause, it is not a must. It is not a prerequisite for this if clause. Not at all. It is a result of this if clause, of this condition. If Lopez wins gold at the next Olympics, he has said that he will retire from athletics. So that is a totally different meaning. And here is the beauty and here is the use, because it's not only about being beautiful, it's about being useful as well. That is another layer of meaning you can add to your conditional sentences. Now, once again, if it's still confusing, let's try to look at the sentences and note the order of cause and effects in the if sentences is reversed. If Lopez is to win gold, that's the effect. He needs to work, that's the cause. That has to happen first. That must be the cause. That must happen first for Lopez to win. That is the effect. But if you use present simple, if Lopez wins gold, that's the cause. He has said that he will retire. That's the effect. So it's reversed. All right? That is a very rich meaning. Don't look at it as a complicated thing. I know it's not easy. I know it's not beginner. I understand this is kind of advanced grammar, but advanced grammar comes with rich meanings, and rich meanings without having to explain yourself in 2 or 3 sentences. You can do it in only 1 sentence. You can only have this rich structure that has big meaning. So that being said, we are left with one final point that we want to talk about, and that has to do with using be about to with infinitive. So for our final point, be about to plus infinitive. We use be about to plus infinitive mainly in conversation to say that something will or will not happen in the near future. So we can use it to talk about something that will or will not. But remember, we're talking about the very near future here. And we mainly use it in conversation, so it's not as formal as be to. Be about to plus infinitive, used mainly in conversation, don't forget that, to say that something will or will not happen in the near future. Let me give you a couple of examples. We are about to eat. Do you want to join us? We are about to eat. That is going to happen in the very future, very near future, maybe in a few seconds, maybe in a few minutes, who knows. But in the very near future, we're about to eat. Or, another example, appearing on TV might make her famous, but it's not about to make her rich. But it's not about to make her rich. That might happen in the future. That might happen in the far future, or in the future, but not in the very near future. Appearing on TV is not about to make her rich in the near future. That's another example to talk about something that will not happen in the near future. And now for a final example, let's say that the computer is not working and somebody comes in and says, "Why don't you switch it off and turn it back on again?" And the other person goes like, "Yes, I was about to try that when you came in. I was about to try that." Not "yes, I was to try," referring to the future from the past. You say here, "Yes, I was about to try that when you came in, but you came in and I didn't get the chance." So, be about to is a lot less complicated than be to. Be to is a lot more complicated than be about to. But be about to is very useful, and sometimes you're going to use it a lot more than be to. Because remember, be to in general is more formal. Be about to is more informal, can be used in conversations. Now, that being said, that'll be everything that I wanted to share with you for today, and I hope you learned something. And remember, as I say all the time, grammar is just a tool. The first thing you need to know when you want to learn something new in grammar, why would I want to learn that? That's the first thing. Because if you don't know exactly why you're learning something, you shouldn't learn it. It's a waste of time. But when you know that you're learning that thing so that you're going to use it in a specific context or something, that's useful. And then think about these things as tools. I say that all the time because that is very important. Don't think about these as rules. These are not rules. These are tools. You have the meaning in your head. No grammar in the world is going to affect what you want to say. But what you want to say is definitely going to affect the grammar you're going to use. And the more tools you have, the more you can say, the better you can express yourself. Think about grammar this way, and you will not be intimidated by the rules, because these are not rules. Remember, these are tools. Now, that being said, let me remind you that you can find more practice on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. So take the link you can find in the description of the episode. It will take you to the custom post we created for this episode, and you will find extra practice there in case you want to practice the things you learn. And this is a very good idea, of course. If you want to support your learning, if you want to make this information that you're learning here permanent and you can use them later on. And of course, there's also the other link that will take you to Patreon if you want to support English Plus, and more importantly, keep it flowing. At least one episode every day, because sometimes we add more than one episode every day, but at least we have one episode every day. Support English Plus and support our mission in providing quality education for free. Now, that being said, this is your host, Danny. I would like to thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast, and I will see you next time.